It began as a quiet murmur, whispered behind the walls of Clarence House, a sense that something had gone terribly wrong. Those who typically spoke in measured, polished tones suddenly resorted to words such as catastrophe and disaster. This was no trivial matter, no passing scandal for the tabloids to feast upon. The subject was Prince Harry, a man once viewed as a symbol of the monarchy's future, now seen by many as unraveling it piece by piece. What had initially appeared to be a tentative attempt at reconciliation with King Charles has spiraled into a public drama, complete with accusations, paranoia, and a palace running out of patience. Rarely does the royal household, with the king's consent, issue such an unfiltered statement to the press, so stark it could have been proclaimed from the palace balcony. Yet that is exactly what has unfolded. The crown, usually careful to remain detached from public squabbles, has shifted into crisis management mode. And it was Harry's own words that ignited the blaze. For months, the meeting at Clarence House was framed as a tentative step toward healing, a father and son carefully rebuilding fragile ties. Many close to the situation noted how fortunate Harry was to even receive that audience. After years of memoirs, interviews, and Netflix documentaries in which he laid bare every grievance, the king still offered him tea and the possibility of mending their relationship. But instead of quiet appreciation, Harry returned with unsettling claims, talk of hidden forces, rumors of sabotage, and conspiracies woven within palace walls. For King Charles, already burdened with the weight of his crown, his health, and the expectations of an entire nation, it was as though he were trying to cup water in his hands while Harry relentlessly poked holes through his fingers. The issue is not merely Harry's words, but the recurring cycle. He quarrels with friends, severs ties with responsibilities, and even distances himself from his homeland. Where others send casual messages, he wages verbal wars. Bridge after bridge burns, leaving him increasingly isolated on an island of his own making. Sources also highlight his failed charity, Centabale. Once a promising endeavor, it has since been described as a public relations disaster. His public clash with its chairwoman, Sandra Chandela, a highly regarded figure admired for her integrity, left the organization in tatters. This is not simply a man prone to anger. It appears to be someone intent on dismantling the very structures that once gave him purpose. And yet, the palace's reaction has carried an almost Shakespearean quality, measured, dramatic, and deeply aware of the weight of history. In its carefully measured tone, the palace chose to describe Harry's latest remarks as counterproductive. In today's world, where every celebrity quarrel is branded as explosive or shocking, such understatement speaks volumes. Those familiar with royal language know the sting hidden in that single word. It recalls Queen Elizabeth's famously restrained but devastating response to the Oprah interview. Recollections may vary. 3 syllables, elegantly lethal, that silenced debate without raising her voice. When palace officials use the word counterproductive, what they truly mean is destructive, damaging, and beyond acceptable. It's a coded message to the world that trust has been shattered, perhaps irreparably. Harry, however, reportedly sees himself quite differently. He views his return to England as a kind of noble mission, imagining himself as the moral cavalry, stepping in to support the monarchy while William and Catherine navigate their own challenges. But this narrative only stokes public outrage and fuels resentment inside the palace. To many, it's as absurd as Count Dracula volunteering at a blood bank. After branding his family racists and profiting from his grievances, he now insists he wants to help. The audacity is staggering. Back in Montecito, where he claims to have found happiness and freedom, his constant declarations only ring hollow. If life is truly so blissful, critics ask, why keep insisting on it so loudly? King Charles's anger is no fleeting frustration. It's the eruption of years of restraint finally breaking. Those close to him describe him as bewildered, even wounded, by the thought that his own son could twist a fragile moment of reconciliation into yet another public battle. Already burdened by his illness, his royal duties, and the expectations of the Commonwealth, Charles has now been forced into the unthinkable, publicly correcting his own child. Insiders revealed that it was Charles himself who authorized palace officials to speak openly, an unprecedented move. Royals simply do not wade into the mud unless they feel trapped. The very fact that the king gave his approval underscores how grave the situation has become. This wasn't about clarifying a small misunderstanding. It was about stamping out the explosive claim that the palace was conspiring against Harry, an allegation so far-fetched that even seasoned courtiers shook their heads in disbelief. What truly unsettles those watching is the paranoia. Harry's talk of shadowy forces sabotaging him has raised troubling questions about his state of mind. Old friends who once partied with him in more carefree days now quietly wonder whether past indulgence in marijuana and other substances may have left deeper marks than anyone realized. Scars remain, and in some circles, the suggestion that Harry's paranoia is a lingering consequence of his past lifestyle is whispered, though rarely spoken outright. The pattern, however, is hard to dismiss. In his memoir Spare, Harry openly admitted to years of heavy drug use. That confession not only cast a shadow on his credibility, but also raised questions about what he disclosed on his U.S. visa application. By admitting everything after the fact, he created both a legal complication and a trust gap that continues to follow him. Now, when he speaks of shadowy forces and unseen enemies working against him, critics draw a direct line back to those years. Some quietly wonder whether his mind and body ever fully recovered. That concern blends into something darker, the growing belief that Harry is not well. Even former allies describe him as a man trapped inside his own anger. The cycle has become familiar: lash out, retreat, lash out again, each round driving away another group of supporters. Even causes that once gave him purpose have suffered. Sentabale, a charity meant to reflect his compassion, has instead become a cautionary tale. His public clash with its respected chairwoman, Sandra Chandela, left the organization fractured and struggling, a monument to how quickly Harry's involvement can unravel into conflict. This is not the story of one turbulent week, but of a man who seems to turn every chance into a battlefield. Meanwhile, life in Montecito is presented through a carefully polished lens. Curated images of idyllic family life, chicken coops, strolls through the garden, picture-perfect smiles, are broadcast as proof of happiness. Yet beneath that sheen lies a constant refrain of insistence. We're happy, we're free, we're thriving. But nothing reveals insecurity more than repeating it endlessly. It's the royal equivalent of posting daily gym selfies while avoiding the scale. The louder Harry proclaims contentment, the less convincing it becomes. So when he claims he only returned to Britain to focus on patronages and family, the words ring hollow. Each denial feels less like truth and more like damage control. That is why the palace's choice of the word counterproductive resonates so strongly. It is not merely diplomatic restraint, it is a verdict. A declaration that Harry has sabotaged himself. His defenders insist he has no desire to return to royal duties and that his California life is enough. But the narrative he spins, of sabotage, betrayal, and victimhood, suggests otherwise. By presenting himself as the target of palace schemes, he manages to keep himself relevant while absolving responsibility. Yet it is a script the public has grown weary of, and one that the palace appears determined to end. King Charles no longer appears willing to indulge his son's behavior. What was once a fragile bond now looks on the verge of permanent rupture, and the man once known as the Spare seems to have exhausted his final chances. Inside Buckingham Palace, the mood is one of exasperation. Courtiers, usually trained to project composure, now describe Harry as a walking crisis, someone incapable of handling even the smallest gesture of reconciliation without turning it into a public spectacle. The meeting at Clarence House, initially seen as a rare opportunity for father and son to reconnect, has instead been recast as a humiliation. Palace insiders suggest Charles now regrets granting it at all, fearing that every private conversation will inevitably be leaked or distorted in the press. In a family built on silence, Harry has become the loudspeaker that never switches off, something a monarch cannot afford to tolerate. Meanwhile, William is said to feel quietly vindicated. For years, he warned that his brother's reckless impulses would only lead to self-destruction. He saw the pattern long before others did: the rash decisions, the endless need for validation, the inability to hold his tongue. Those close to him insist he takes no joy in being right, but there is a grim satisfaction in watching his predictions come true. He knows his father's instinct has always been to forgive Harry. Yet now even Charles's patience appears to have reached its breaking point. William, by contrast, remains focused on his own family, Catherine's health, and the long preparation for his future role as king. Watching his brother's downward spiral has only strengthened his conviction that the monarchy cannot compromise itself for one man's chaos. Public opinion remains sharply divided. Some view Harry as a tragic figure, a man consumed by paranoia, haunted by grief and undone by his own decisions. They remember the boy who walked behind his mother's coffin, the soldier who served in Afghanistan, the prince who once lit up crowds with charm. To them, that Harry is gone, replaced by someone who fights phantoms and blames everyone but himself for the wreckage. Others are far less sympathetic. To them, Harry is simply entitled, the world's least content millionaire, railing from his California mansion while ordinary people struggle to make ends meet. His claims of sabotage strike many as absurd when weighed against the privileges he continues to enjoy, and his public denials have not helped. Each one is issued in legalistic, carefully crafted language, as if written by nervous attorneys. When a newspaper reported on details of his private meeting with Charles, Harry's office fired back with accusations, yet the statement only reinforced the impression of a man at war with both perception and reality. Harry's latest response to the press revealed yet another miscalculation. His office lashed out at reports as lies and invention, yet in the same statement, confirmed details about gifts exchanged, ironically strengthening the credibility of the very story they sought to discredit. For seasoned palace watchers, it was a rookie error, taking on an institution that thrives on precision and rarely wastes words. When the palace described his remarks as counterproductive, it was no offhand remark. It was a calculated strike, sharp enough to signal disapproval, yet restrained enough to avoid outright confrontation. Harry, however, seems unable to grasp the nuance. Instead of reading the message between the lines, he reacts with loud rebuttals that only magnify his mistakes. The consequences are now undeniable. Any hope of Harry ever rejoining the royal fold in an official capacity has evaporated. There will be no hybrid role, no half-in, half-out arrangement. The late Queen made that boundary clear, and King Charles, after this latest wave of accusations, has no intention of revisiting it. Future invitations, if they come at all, will be brief, cautious, and tightly controlled. Trust, once broken in royal circles, is rarely restored. The true tragedy for Harry is that the door was once open. He had, however slim, an opportunity to rebuild trust with his father, to prove he could keep confidences rather than leak them. But suspicion and resentment took the lead, and with them his chance slipped away. Now the story has hardened. A monarch too burdened to indulge a wayward son. A brother who watches from a distance, quietly convinced that his warnings were right. And a prince whose greatest downfall has not been the words of others, but his own. The monarchy endures, moving forward as it always has. But Harry stands outside its gates, convinced he is helping even as his actions push him further away.